Okay, good morning. Welcome to the June 9th, 2021 regular meeting of the Needham Board of Health. I'm Rob Partridge, Chair of the Needham Board of Health. This open meeting of the Board of Health is being conducted remotely per the Governor's Executive Order of March 12, 2020, due to the COVID-19 pandemic emergency and is being recorded. Public access to this meeting does not ensure there will be public participation unless required by law. Public comment at this meeting is not anticipated. I will introduce each board member and each participant on the meeting agenda. Please respond by saying yes when your name is called. Kathleen Brown?
Yes.
Steve Epstein?
Yes.
Christina Matthews?
Yes.
Okay, and Ed Cosgrove is going to be late. Okay, and just to go to the rest of the participants, Lynn Sheff?
Yes.
Tara Gurge?
Yes.
Tiffany Zeik?
Yes.
Karen Shannon?
Yes.
Talib Abdelrahim?
Yes.
Mary Fountain?
Yes.
Diana Acosta?
Yes.
And Marianne Donnell. We know you're there, but we can't see you or hear you. But we'll take it as a yes. Okay, so getting to our business. First up is a review of the minutes of April 28th, May 14th, and May 27th. And I thought we would just discuss them individually and then maybe vote as a group if we can do that.
Yeah, there's one staff correction, Mr. Chair, and Mary, you had pointed out to me, I forget which, I think it was the May 14th minutes, where the work of your team of contact tracers, Jessica Fuchs, Isabella Caruso, and Amy McKerney, I think it was attributed to another staff member, the work they had done. So I just wanted to clarify that point. And that was was it May 14th, Mary?
That was 4 pages into the packet. So yeah, it was the
End of
I
April.
think May 14th.
Okay, great.
Okay, so we'll make that correction. Anything else on April 28th? Okay, moving to May 14th. I had one question on that, and that was at the end about the 2 meetings through the month. My recollection was that we had planned to do that through the 2 scheduled meetings in June, which would include the one that was originally scheduled on June 23rd. Am I correct on that, or?
That's my recollection as well.
Okay, because the meeting minute says that we would stop the 2 meetings per month at the end of May.
Yep.
So it just needs to be corrected.
Sure.
Other comments on May 14th? Okay, May 27th.
I had one comment on that. It is the second page under Tiffany's update. It says Ms. Zeik reported that the state database is not reflecting pediatric numbers as quickly as it is required to do. And consequently, the numbers are lagging by about 1 week. And that was in relation to, I think, PelMed's inputting the data. So we might just want to make that clarification.
Yeah, I would change it from that the state database is not reflecting, or I would add the piece that it hasn't been inputted as quickly as it needs to have been.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Other comments on the 27th? Okay, so I'll look for a motion to accept these meetings, all 3, with the amended changes.
I'll make that motion. I'll second.
Okay, and we'll go to a vote. Kathleen?
Yes.
Christina?
Yes.
Steve?
Yes.
And Rob is yes. Okay, so the meeting minutes are approved. And that brings us to staff reports. And I think first up is environmental health. Tara, I think.
Thank you all. Good morning. So I'll just start off. So it's been a lot of changes this month, as you know, with the COVID restrictions being lifted. So Diana was great and got that Board of Health advisory out to all our businesses. Again, we just use our email list and we've been fielding calls to educate people on the changes there. I'll let Diana talk more about the protocols for pools and things like that. We basically the biggest update we have right now is that we hired a new intern that's going to be starting next week. So basically she'll be taking over Paige's spot. And so that we're happy to hire someone. Next Monday will be their start date, preferably once they get everything cleared with HR, but we'll bring her in to orient her into the office on Mondays, and then she'll work another couple remote days during the week. So she's be doing the farmers market inspections as well. So we're happy to bring her on board. And the other update I wanted to share is about just a tricky housing case that came up a little bit, and I'll try to keep it not too detailed, but basically we got a call from police about at Charles River Landing. They had a well check that was conducted, and they felt that it alerted us to the situation in the unit. A lot of things that were observed didn't meet the health and sanitation code. So we got right on board with Springwell and Tiffany and the nurses and Diana and I. We did a site visit and met with the occupant, and we clearly saw that she needed help. She needs trash removal services, etc. So we've been in, we did a conference call with everybody online, including Springwell and Kath social workers, and we're now setting her up on a long-term plan to help her with her cleaning. So Springwell will get on board to increase her cleaning services. They got her a track phone yesterday, which was great because her phone wasn't working. So right now it seems like we're on the right track to get her the services she needs, and that will be something we'll be monitoring to make sure that, yes, she can live safely in her home with these services. We've been getting an increase in odor complaints, believe it or not, because she's been putting her items in the hallway of her unit. And Diana has been fielding calls about odors. Her neighbors are calling about that. So obviously she definitely needs these services. So we're really trying to expedite that. Unless you have any other questions, I'll let Diana continue with her report.
Yep. So, Kathleen, I don't know if you had a question. I saw you unmuted.
Oh, I was just wondering about the hotel opening 4 or 5 floors. Like, have they been flushing? I'm worried about Legionella, so I hope that's
yeah. So Sheridan, yeah, they've been closed as you may or may not know throughout the pandemic, and yeah, they we're doing floor to floor opening, starting with the upper floors, flushing, cleaning the rooms, like double cleaning them, like they go through, clean them all, change the linens, go back because the dust would settle, they clean it again. So they've been doing this throughout all last month, and then and so in preparation. And Diana went and did the second round of inspections recently.
Yeah, so basically all the floors are ready to go now. When I went in, they were still in process, and I saw housekeeping walking through cleaning rooms. But the rooms that I had checked, hot water is good, the hand railings are good, all the ice machines, there was some issues like with the ice not coming out, so they knew to get the plumber out there. But other than that, everything was cleaned out, filters were cleaned. It looked like everything was flushed. When the water was coming out clear in all the rooms. Hot water was available, because essentially the hotel was left alone for a year. So it was just cleaning out everything. The kitchen, that's the next big project, is to tackle that kitchen area to kind of get back into the swing of having the restaurant open again.
And the pool too later on. They're not focusing on that yet.
I didn't even get to look at the pool, but they told me that they drained most of it. So that's going to be a huge project to tackle, just to make sure that nothing shifted, because you're really not supposed to empty a pool completely dry. You still want to have some water in there. So we'll see how that is moving forward. But the team's been very professional, very good working with us, and we're just working with them to alert us when they're ready to get inspected. But they are actively working on getting the hotel back to where it was. And then, so as you guys know, on May 29th, the restrictions were lifted. So I've just been fielding a ton of calls. People are still a little bit confused as to what is happening with that. Cause like I had questions about the pools, like, oh, do we still have to do 50% capacity? So it's just that learning curve that people, I have to tell people, like, technically we're back to normal pre-COVID stuff. So I still have inquiries, which is good that people are being cautious. So inquiries about events that they're asking if there's still gathering limits, what can I do, what can't I do? So at least people are still aware that they should be more on the careful side, which I'm happy about, but just letting them know that they technically can, you know, go back to normal with certain events. And they're just asking questions, which is great that they come to us directly with anything that they might be confused on. But the temporary permits, that's starting up again. So people are starting to get back into that groove too. And are there any questions on the report that anyone had any like specific things that they wanted to go over?
Just wondering if we really getting Tal hooked up to sewer that quickly? That was pretty fast.
Oh, for that, Walker.
Yeah. Yeah, we kind of got that update. He wanted information about how to abandon his system. And I said, oh, are they connecting you? And so he said they had connected them. I can reach back with sewer to get the latest update on that. We haven't gotten any of the abandonment forms back yet, so I'm not sure if that got delayed.
Yeah, but that's still much faster than I think anybody anticipated. So good.
Yeah.
Indeed.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, town meeting did pay quite a lot of money to run the sewer down the street.
Yep.
But it is a good outcome, and obviously Walker Pond is a, you know, water body in the town that has had significant impact from high nitrogen levels, so you can't do anything but help that.
Diana, I had a quick question. You know, I think for months we've been seeing in like the new food permits, the Thai Story restaurant is in progress. What exactly is happening there?
They're doing construction right now. I have to get back into the loop with him. We had some concerns because they share a basement with Latina. So it's just the construction that's actively going on, making sure that any dust or anything's not migrating next door. I was actually at Sweet Basil yesterday and I kind of was like, oh, what's going on next door? And they said it's literally like one person kind of working on the whole thing. We've had their plan review, I think, for 2 years now. But with coronavirus, everything kind of paused. So now he's restarting. So I just have to reconnect with him so that I could start doing a walkthrough. But that's going in the building where the FedEx used to be. So he has to completely convert that into a restaurant. It wasn't a restaurant before.
Okay.
But yeah, that's just there because it's pending. It's just been pending for months at this point.
Looks like Rob's frozen. Oh, there you go.
Yeah, sorry about that. Okay, further discussion on environmental health? Okay, so why don't we move on to traveling meals, Marianne?
You hear me?
Yes?
Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Great, thank you. Good morning. Traveling meals, as every month goes, it's proceeding wonderfully. The volunteers, I cannot stress enough how marvelous they've been. Summer program will start June 18th. The 4 people that worked last summer will do it again this summer. I have also 2 subs. A volunteer from the summer had applied for the position and we hired her. And last night I interviewed a high school graduate that's interested in the job. We'll send out an offer letter and see if he takes it, and he will be the other sub. So that's it. Any questions? Hello? Hello?
Hi, Marianne, we can hear you. I don't believe there's any
Great.
questions right now.
Great, thank you. That's it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, I faded out again.
That's okay. I'm having trouble with my mic. I don't know why.
All
Anyway,
right,
thank you.
thank you for your report and
Okay.
great work.
Thank the volunteers. They do it all.
Thank them for us.
I will.
Okay. Any further questions for Marianne? All right, substance use prevention. Karen, Shannon?
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. The prevention team / SPAN had a busy month in May. We wrapped up our quarterly meetings for this past year on May 11th to honor and reflect on all of the accomplishments despite the pandemic in the last year. And we also had our coalition attend a training and development class on positive community norms. We brought in a trainer from the Montana Institute who conducted a 2-hour session for the coalition on an introduction to the science of the positive, built by Jeff Lincolnback, and an overview of how to implement positive community norms in your coalition messaging. And we're pretty excited about that. We've contracted them for some additional technical assistance hours that a small working group of the coalition membership is participating in so that we can actually get down into more of the details of how to apply positive community norms in the messaging. And our goal is to complete those technical assistance hours with an actual product of messaging around substance use prevention for the campaign that we're working on. Our vaping grant is coming to a bit of a close for the school year since we have completed most of the goals of the grant objectives around the vaping cessation program, implementing vaping education into the wellness curriculum, and providing recommendations on best practices for their vaping diversion program at the high school. We expect that we'll do a little bit of work over the summer in anticipation of renewing a stronger launch for the vaping cessation program at the high school in the fall, especially with the school hopefully bringing students back in person. And if that's the actual outcome, we will be excited to be able to provide that service a little more directly to students since the pandemic kind of mitigated the success on that. And then in other news, we have our Stop Act grant is underway. We have a new person who we hope to be recruiting for that grant. And we have another one of the prevention team, Monica DeWinter, who will be assisting in the administration of that grant. So more to come on that. And other than that, I think, I do want to comment that we taught mental health first aid to a group of 7 people in the community last month. And we hope to be offering that again this summer. And in light of all of the concerns around mental health, particularly around youth, we're really hoping that we can see more participation for that class since it has such a fundamental impact in educating adults around the warning signs of youth mental health conditions and challenges. I think that's everything I have. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for Karen? Carol, are you raising your hand?
No,
Oh, okay.
I was next, but I forgot the questions part.
Okay. Thank you, Karen. I did enjoy the Salsa's accomplishments video, which was a nice quick watch. All right. So I have Talib next.
Whoop. Can I,
But if you would like to go ahead, Carol, I think that's fine.
I'm going to log off because just one of the 2 things. I wanted to thank Tiffany and Tim. They worked with me last month to resubmit the Mass Call 3 substance use prevention application. We are partnering Needham as lead agency this year with Walpole, Dedham Public Health, and Westwood. And we hope to be funded and start either July 1st or soon after. And the focus of that grant is underage substance use prevention. And it is informed with 8 principles of health equity and systems work that will bring minority and underrepresented populations to the table. And the other thing I wanted to say is I am headed to the State House and going to the event sponsored by the MHOA and to advocate for more for FY22 public health funding. And I just want to say we have been working, my Board of Health, Medfield, to advocate for allocation of American Rescue Plan funds that the town has received for public health. We feel that that was the intention, and certainly Medfield can build the capacity for public health. And so this today, as you all know, is about FY22 line item for dedicated public health funding. So we're all trying to advocate and have a voice for public health when often we don't. So that's that.
All right, thank you. And yeah, thanks for doing that. Any questions for Carol? All right, Talib, Emergency Management.
Yep. Good morning, everyone. Our update, it's for local level. We have coordinated and scheduled our first training to provide to our MRC volunteers. It's about the shelter operation and mass care, and we coordinate with the American Red Cross to give this training. Second, we had the MRC meeting last month, welcoming new volunteers and answering their questions. Third, Tiffany and I, hopefully tomorrow we will finish the organizing the basement. For on an original level, we submitted our monthly report to the MRC about the MRC survey questionnaire to our NC8 coordinator. Also, we submit our COVID after action report feedback to our NC8 coordinator as well. Last, for regional level, we update our EDS plan to reflect the using technology in the EDS plan. So because there is a fund to get new tablets from the region 4AB, and this is my update.
Thank you.
I do have one question that comes up. Talib, you mentioned that you're reorganizing the basement. That's where the storage is for all of the equipment?
Yes, it's in the basement, but we organize the public health side.
Understood. Basement of what building?
It's Rosemary building.
Okay. And what would happen if Rosemary somehow was inaccessible?
Do you mean inaccessible to the basement or the main?
Oh, are you in reference
Let's
to
say that there
emergency
was some
supplies?
sort of an attack on Rosemary, or something happened in Rosemary where there was a fire, or the building was flooded and you didn't have access to it, and we needed to get that equipment. I'm just wondering about a backup.
So
Yeah.
the trailer. Tell them
Yeah.
about the trailer. Yeah.
We have the EDS trailer. Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. That's what I wanted to hear.
Yeah.
And Talib, that's kept stored, the emergency dispensing site trailer is kept stored at?
It's the fire department.
Okay.
We do also have, Tiffany, you can correct me if I'm wrong, we have some shelter supplies in the basement of Kath, I believe. Or the,
Not really anymore at the CAF. We have shelter supplies at the high school, and a few, if any, left at the Daily building, but there is most of the big things like cots and things like that are kept at the high school.
one of the things that, so it's absolutely true, we need redundancy, Steve, you're absolutely right. We are moving out of the basement all of the records. We brought all of our paper records from town hall, including, Board of Health records that go back 100 years. There wasn't enough space for them in the climate controlled section of the office. So we're bringing them back to town hall in the file storage area. So the only sort of storage elements we're going to have is sort of supplies and equipment. All of our sort of records are going to go back to climate control, which I think is a good thing for us.
Have those records been digitized yet?
They have not.
That might be something worth considering. I understand there's an expense, so it might not happen right away, but that would provide redundancy for those as well, because paper records, obviously, once they're lost for good.
Right. As we found out when we were trying to look at Tobacco 21 and some of the board meeting minutes, there was one binder worth of board meeting minutes that was lost that covered basically half of the board's discussions about Tobacco 21, which was very frustrating. So yeah, I think that's absolutely on town meeting warrant for the past year that passed for the fiscal year that would begin July 1. There was a special warrant article to digitize a number of the town clerk's records with the added sort of, I guess, incentive or hook that then they would be sort of searchable. So if you needed a birth certificate, you could search for it. If you needed a marriage certificate, you could search for it. I think we could certainly consider doing a warrant article or pushing the town to say, digitizing paper records has to be a priority across the town departments, and the town should sort of advance this rather than the health division specifically.
That's a good point. Okay. Anything else on emergency management? All right. Thank you, Talib. Public health nursing, Tiffany.
Morning. So just a couple quick things, and then I'll let Mary go into the communicable diseases. DVAC did a great Mother's Day drive where they were able to get about $700 worth of items to put in Mother's Day baskets that they gave to REACH recipients in their shelter. They did a what to do, what to say, and that was really prompted through the need for the pandemic and how to respond or help domestic violence survivors. And so they anticipated only having about 15 people, but they ended up having 24 come with 30 registrations. So it was really well received, and it was a very great presentation. As Talib expressed, we did an MRC meeting. We continue to work with camps around regulations, continue to work with the town leadership about reopening and discussions on masks. And then the nurses did a hoarding 101 course for weekly training, and we have weekly trainings going on about public health nursing. And then Mary and her team are continuing a few COVID cases and follow-ups and doing some follow-up calls to our residents to see how they're faring. And Mary, if you want to.
Yeah, so much quieter month on the COVID front. I made the mistake of sending an email saying that we currently had nobody isolating from COVID in the town of Needham. And of course, within the hour, I got a notice that we had a new positive, so I'll own that one. Besides that, we had one case of babesiosis, 2 campies, and 1 case of salmonella. And if anybody has any specific questions, I've talked to all of them, so.
Questions about communicable disease or other public health nursing issues? All right, thank you both. And the COVID monthly report is next. Is Hannah Whitehead here?
No, she's not here, so I'll run through that.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you, Tim. It's much easier to read than what I printed. So as we can see, we've kind of come to a straight line, which is great with our cumulative cases. Only 20 for the month of May, which is a huge jump down from the previous weeks, but especially since January, we've decreased overall. So we've definitely flattened our upward swing, which is great. So if you see the epidemic curve, hopefully we'll continue to see it trend that way. Total of 1,758 cases of confirmed cases. This is just our breakdown by age. You can see May goes super short comparative to the other ones, but still seems to trend in the same direction of which case ages are which percentages. And then gender. So this is May. Kind of split, and I find it interesting that there's a few more probables in the male than confirmed, but either way, they still almost exactly 50-50. So as you can see, January, and as you're aware, January was our roughest month. It's just continued to trend down since. Say with COVID testing, as we see the testing decrease by a lot. I think this next week, and I think last week were even less positivity rate. I think it was like a 0.1 something. And we'll continue that way this week, or a lot less.
0.15.
Huh?
0.15.
Thank you. Symptomatic cases for May. So we still see 14. So 70% of them are symptomatic, which actually is good and kind of working well with vaccinations, because then we know that what we're doing is correct. Those who are having symptoms are getting tested. So, so variants of concern, 10 cases identified with 3 breakthrough infections in May after they've been fully vaccinated.
Have any of the breakthroughs had any complications like hospitalization?
Not that I know of. All of the ones that I've spoken to have had mild cases.
Were they all mostly symptomatic? Like, why did they get tested?
So one that jumps to mind was symptomatic, got tested, and then because that individual had been tested positive, the rest of the household tested positive, and then so spouse then was an asymptomatic breakthrough case. Wouldn't necessarily been tested otherwise, but the individual was curious. And that's actually one of the ones that we had sequenced.
Right.
I pulled that one to sequence.
Okay. Yeah, that's what I was wondering, how many are getting sequenced.
Yeah, anytime I come across one that's breakthrough, I send a line in to get it sequenced if it's quickly enough.
I mean, we have so few cases. Are some places just sequencing all? Do we know if that's like where the state's moving? Because I mean,
the issue is more of the sample itself. And so part of it is, I know the Broad, if I notice someone had their positive test and it was, the lab that did it was the Broad, that's a great option for sequencing because they, that's just one of the labs that they're using for it. CVS, we're having a harder time getting those samples back. So, and then it depends upon the sample quality itself. And so one other case that I contacted the state DPH to have them pull for potential sequencing, the sample wasn't a high enough quality for them to use it. So that's primarily what we're looking for in terms of who gets sequenced and who doesn't.
I don't know this. I don't think the state has changed their amount of randomized sequencing they're doing, but since there's a lot fewer tests, that percentage is going to be a lot less sequencing. So I haven't heard that they're going to sequence more yet.
Yeah.
Okay. Oh, perfect. So 4 household clusters with 11 linked cases, which was 55% of our confirmed cases in May. 1 daycare cluster, but no cases in Needham, 2 congregate cares with 1 Needham case, and then 1 business cluster with 1 Needham case from April. Contacts, and with vaccinations, contact numbers will continue to plummet because you don't have to be a contact if you are vaccinated, fully vaccinated. So those are the contacts we've had so far for May, or so far total. Vaccine coverage. So as you can see, 79% has at least 1 dose of all Needham residents, and 67% are fully vaccinated. And then our 12% that are partially vaccinated. And I think we'll also start seeing the partially vaccinated continue to decline here as we see that we have quite a large group of Needham residents that are vaccinated. So again, we'll continue to go down as the vaccine coverage goes up, our incidence goes down. And we might see these rare little jumps every once in a while, but that's the difference of 1 case in 2 weeks versus 2 cases in 2 weeks. So overall, this is our coverage by age. I think the next one has percentages as well, which again, fully vaccinated is this comparative to the state information. We know the denominator numbers they're using are a little bit different than the actual numbers we receive. So it may be over 100%.
And Tiffany, it probably is obvious, but the reason that the 0% of 12 to 15-year-olds are fully vaccinated because they have not had a long enough period where they've been eligible to get the first dose, the second dose, and then wait 2 weeks for full vaccination status, right?
Correct. So yeah, so here is the vaccination status by race and ethnicity, by percentages of those who have received at least 1 dose or fully vaccinated. Fully vaccinated, here's the actual numbers broken down by race and ethnicity. Everything's still in an upward trend, which is nice. So hopefully we can continue that. Vaccinations by town comparative to our neighboring towns. We're leading in almost every spot except for 50 to 74 fully vaccinated. So and then as at least 1 dose. So this one was published on 27th. This is not the newest updated numbers. We're up to like 1,200, I think, on the meeting you did on Monday, Tim. But we are up to the, I think it was almost 70% have at least 1 dose of our 12 to 15-year-olds.
I'll actually share that screen briefly. So that was the most recent data. It includes some of the lagged, I think, reporting came in. So you can see that, you know, it always seemed a little bit weird that Needham and Newton are sort of neck and neck in almost every category in terms of vaccinations. And with the end of May, Needham had 25% of its 12 to 15-year-olds and Newton had 64. I think this seems a little bit more plausible that Needham has almost or just a little bit more than Newton has vaccinated. So I think the data that was lagging has finally caught up.
Any questions?
Oh, maybe just briefly, Tiff, we'll do the vaccines administered by Needham Public Health. I know we're running a little bit behind.
Oh, yeah. So they continue to decline, especially as the state still requires you to use it within 10 days, and it's just not as possible. So February was our largest month, obviously. We're actually doing a clinic right now, which is why Hannah is out there. She's doing second doses of some people we did in some of the 30s we did in May. So yeah, we'll be anxious to see what the state requires, or we'll ask to do if we do have to do a another dose. What is it called? A booster. So we'll figure out that when they let us know.
All right. We've come a long way since January. All this data is so welcome.
Yeah, I think I think long-term, one of my questions or concerns is, Lynn did a great job applying for a Metro West Health Foundation grant to get us a part-time epi. Tiffany and her team have worked with Hannah Whitehead, and we've been very fortunate to have her, and we're going to have her for a few more months. But long-term, I think it shows sort of the value of having someone who really is focused on data and also making data accessible and visually appealing for public presentations. And that's not a function we normally have in the public health budget. So I think that's one of my concerns long-term is I think there's a thirst for more information from the public about a range of public health topics, and having the ability to provide that information and do it in a visually appealing way, I think is important. And if we can try to find resources, whether they're operating budget or other grants, to try to address that need, that's one of my sort of priorities, at least in the near term.
I agree. It's really helpful. And as you say, it's information that the public wants as well. Good information. Okay. Any further questions on the COVID monthly report? All right, so that brings us to discussion of public health accreditation and I think the public health department policies.
So Lynn was going to lead that discussion.
I'm going to start with talking about accreditation. I think I'm not sure, Rob, if you mean the individual policies for board review or policies in general, but I'm going to look at the larger scheme.
Okay, yeah, the larger scheme for accreditation, but then at the end of that, there was just a couple of pages on some of the policies and when the reviews were due.
Oh, right. Okay.
At the last meeting, I think we didn't do, we had an item on reviewing policies, but we ended up not doing it that meeting. So that's why I mentioned it now.
Okay. So if you've all had a chance to read the report that I wrote, the report begins with an overview of what we are required to do before we even apply for accreditation. There are three prerequisites that we must complete before we even submit our application. Once we do submit our application, we have just 12 months to submit supporting documentation. So it's really important to have as much of that stuff done as possible. We have made some progress on the first prerequisite. The three prerequisites are a community health assessment, the community health improvement plan, and a strategic plan. In terms of the community health assessment, there are three big chunks actually that we have accomplished. Unfortunately, one of them is no longer valid in terms of our time frame, and that's the senior survey on transportation and housing. But what we do have is the community health, I think the community health needs assessment that BID and Needham did. They were very accommodating in working with us to include more of the specific focus that we need for accreditation. The assessment that Rachel Kane did at Needham Housing Authority also is something that we can include in part of our overall community health assessment. I would like at some point to talk about doing another senior assessment. What that gives us is important direction for our work, as it did 5 years ago. And it also provides a more focused look at a specific subpopulation, which is something that accreditation is looking for. Needham Housing Authority assessment did that as well. After the overview, you have a very detailed list of what's required for those three prerequisites. some progress towards those prerequisites, and then finally are the conclusion. So I kind of assuming that you all have read this, I would like to entertain questions.
So
I have a bigger question on the whole thing with accreditation at this point.
Yeah.
And Ed, I'm sure you're going to want to chime in here too. I know we've been after this for a while, and we're going to have to make a case to the finance committee as to why this is worth it. And given what just happened with COVID, where local public health was basically pushed aside, didn't matter that we are, you know, one of the better local health departments in the state. We were treated just like some, you know, other communities that basically barely have the local health departments. What's going to be the case that we can make that this is worth it?
I'm going to leave that to Tim and to Ed to respond.
Well, first off, I think
because the state's not going to listen to us anyway. I mean, you know,
no,
even if we have this, is going to be different.
Right, I realize that, but I think that we can show that we're working because of our contacts within the community, because of the success we've had with vaccinations, even, you know, the ones we've done, and I think that even though the state may have taken over the vaccination, the fact that Needham has such a high rate of vaccinations signifies, you know, the work on our part to get people out to get vaccinated anyway. Plus, we have obviously a very highly educated community. So I think we can come up with probably what we need from all that. And as far as the senior survey goes, once the senior center opens, we could be ready to start right in the fall when people come back from, you know, vacations and start thinking long term again, and work through the senior center and the staff at the senior center on a senior survey so we could get that done.
I do think, Ed, and to Stephen's point, I think it's challenging. Finance committee in the past has not found any of sort of the arguments we've advanced compelling, because this has been funding for public health accreditation has been something that we have put in as a special warrant article request in, I think, 3 of the last 5 years. The challenge, I think, is in part, like you said, is we have what we believe is a fairly strong, well-run department that can discharge all of its statutory responsibilities. And yet the state, as part of its planning for COVID response, sort of went away from working with local public health as a partner in many instances. I don't think we can control that. I think we can hopefully appeal to the fact that, you know, having a well-run department is valuable, that being able to meet all of these requirements is valuable, having a, you know, independent, you know, assertion of our capabilities that isn't just based on we think we're pretty good. I think there's value there. I don't know that finance committee is ever going to be that supportive unless or until accreditation is a prerequisite for grants. And Ed, you've talked about in the context of research in hospital and hospital laboratory settings, if you have sort of essentially animal lab certification and licensure, you get to skip a whole bunch of paperwork. Until that happens, I don't know that finance committee is going to advocate for it. But the amount of money we're talking about is generally fairly modest. So if it's something that the Board of Health supports publicly, if it's something the Select Board supports publicly, I don't necessarily see finance committee fighting tooth and nail against something like $50,000. I do have to mention, and I don't know if it will survive state budget negotiations, but Denise Garlick, who's, you know, long been a champion of public health generally and Needham Public Health in particular, she used to be a board member, did put into the state budget an earmark that would support, I believe it was $50,000 for public health accreditation. If it was passed and survived negotiations, the conference committee between the House and the Senate, that would be in the fiscal year that takes effect July 1. We probably won't know for a little while. Usually the legislature doesn't actually pass their budget in time for it to start on July 1. But I think that's a very positive thing. And that also is potentially a way to incentivize finance committee. Like, look, we got a NACHO grant a couple of years ago to do some accreditation work. We got a state earmark to do some accreditation work. And all we need is you to put a little skin in the game for us to get across the finish line. That is my hope anyway.
Yeah, I mean, I don't disagree that it's a good thing to do, but I'm just trying to play devil's advocate here, because if I were on finance committee and I say, look, you're doing a great job now. So what does this get you? And what does it get the town? And the answer is, not that much. I mean, basically you're saying you want an independent audit. Do we need an independent audit? That's, I think that's a question. That's what we're going to be pushing, basically, is to say, look, we think we're good, but we have blind spots like everybody else, and this is the way to find those out. And if we can get the funding for it, terrific. But it's a tough ROI case to make, given that we are already a high-performing department.
Yes,
I agree with that. I mean, and we will have to make a strong case. I think between the safe legislation that's in the mill, and that's going to put pressure on DPH also to start putting pressure in turn on the local health departments to improve their standards and to meet certain public health standards. And one of the ways that we can show that we do that is because we're accredited.
It's ironic because the only health departments that can apply are really the high functioning ones, because the effort is so great and their requirements are so great. The departments that have applied, that have gotten accredited in Massachusetts are all very high functioning ones.
And Lynn, right now that list is the State Department of Public Health, Boston, Cambridge, and Worcester, I believe. Is that?
I think Brookline as well, but I'm not sure about that.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, like, when I first came on the board, I was never sold on this process, on why it's important. And I've researched it a fair amount too. I can see that, like, the self-assessment part. So going through the process, even, I guess, if you don't get accreditation, is perhaps worth it. But and I'm on the board, and I don't necessarily get like what the end game is for this. So yeah, I can read your report. I don't necessarily understand everything that goes into it and everything that's required to complete this. So I know I'm, showing my ignorance, but it hasn't been well explained to me.
I'm sorry, Kathleen, the process hasn't been well explained?
With the benefit.
Pardon?
Like the benefits. Like I hear that it helps with grants or something. That's been the vague benefit that I've heard of. But yeah, it hasn't, yeah. So.
And I think it is vague what the benefits are. There's no question that the process is beneficial. And in fact, the work that we have done so far really has pushed the department forward. So I'm not sure that, I mean, that's why I deferred the argument, because I'm not equipped to make that argument.
Yeah, I agree with what Lynn's saying. I think the most important aspect of this whole thing probably is, in fact, the self-assessment. And just taking a step back, taking a good look at ourselves, seeing where our strengths and weaknesses are, and then directing our efforts at improvement towards our weaknesses. And we wouldn't probably do that if we weren't trying to go through this exercise. So I think that's where the real strength lies. And I think it's, as Lynn says, it's paid off already.
But I think that certainly highlights some of the work we have to do. Is we have to have a strong, case for change. We have to have a strong sort of cost-benefit analysis, and we can proceed on two fronts. One is hopefully some financial benefits, which I believe are ill-defined, but hopefully there's some of them. Some of it also is Needham likes to think of itself as a high achieving community. Needham likes to think of itself as very advanced. There are fire department certifications, there's police department certifications, there's school related certifications. This is the only public health related certification. And having sort of an official imprimatur that says we are high functioning, we achieve all of these capabilities, we have the capability to serve the town and its residents. I think there is value in that, but it's a diffuse argument and we have to concentrate it.
I mean, I'm not saying not to do it. I'm saying, we need to sell it.
Definitely.
Can I just ask in this NP, so there's this whole table of all these policies. Oh, is that separate? That's the due dates and things. That's not part of your update.
Actually, it is. That's just to give you an idea of the policies that we have already written.
Okay.
And the last column, review date, that's the date by which we should have reviewed the policy. Obviously, we have good reasons for not having done it in 2020.
Okay.
I've started the process of getting people to review our existing policies. So I think we'll achieve that within the next month or so.
So some of these I'm noticing are on a 2-year review cycle, at least one on a 3-year cycle. It seems very, very tight. Number of organizations I'm part of usually have a 5-year review cycle for policies.
For accreditation, they require a 2-year cycle.
So you review all these policies every 2 years?
Mm-hmm. Which doesn't mean rewriting them.
Yeah.
In most cases, it's simply reviewing them and signing them again. In some cases, it will push us to make changes that we discover that we need.
But are there other larger things like the senior assessment that was done in 2016, which sort of times out if we were to apply now? Are there other pieces like that sort of are going to just continually expire as we move forward with this?
No, it's those 3 prerequisites that are critical. So the assessment, I mean, we could go forward with the 2 pieces that we have. I mean, really what we have to do is we have to take a look at which holes we need to fill to produce what we think is a good, solid community health assessment. Then move on to the health improvement plan and then the strategic plan. If we have the concentrated staff time, it is achievable, I think, 6 to 10 months.
I think coming out of COVID, I think it's an interesting mix right now of sort of excitement to get back to maybe core public health prevention and promotion activities amongst the staff, as well as a feeling of sort of exhaustion and having run a marathon. So it's an interesting mix. I'm hoping that as the weeks go by, the feeling of exhaustion slowly fades and the excitement sort of to get back to more traditional public health activities takes over. And I think accreditation could be a big part of that, especially if we have some state funded resources to bring on additional part-time staff to help. I think
too, sorry, I was just gonna say, I think too, as we're coming out of COVID, that data could be critical in this process because we're gonna see an uptake in our regular activities to try to get back to normal for the next couple of years. So I think that could definitely be a good piece on that as well.
Sure. Agreed. I think the board knows that most of these policies are sort of related to the administrative operations of the department, like how we post a legal notice, how we do payroll, how we approve out-of-state travel for conferences, that sort of thing. One of the ones that sort of toes the line, I think, is the next topic in the agenda, which is it's the second topic in the agenda. I'll briefly touch on it before we go to Wells, is the racial equity policy. And the reason we're bringing that to the board is it's, I think, a very important topic, and it ties into the discussion about Needham Unites Against Racism. And that's why we want to sort of have an extended discussion. I think that's a good use of the board's time. I don't know that, reviewing the work-related travel policy is the best use of the board's time. And that's just to distinguish why we bring some of these to the board and some of them are just sort of subject to my approval as we administer the operations of the department. So anything that has a broad sort of community focus, anything that relates to overall health and wellness of the community is something that we would bring to the board. And the things that are more about how the department functions on a daily basis and how office supplies get ordered and people get paid are things that we do internally.
Yeah, I think that's a good split, you know, simple administrative functions. I mean, if you had a problem with something and we needed to bring it to us, fine. But if it's working, just approve.
Yeah. So the
One
next,
other-
oh, sorry, Christine.
Okay. No, I just wanted to say that, you know, I think when I looked through all of this, I agree with a lot of the sentiments that have been shared that, you know, I've been trying to understand what the benefit is for us. And I assumed it was related to grant fund, you know, that we would be eligible for more grant funding, but it sounds like that's not a requirement. The strategic planning piece that's required, I think to me was really appealing because I feel like in public health as a whole across the country, we are kind of at a crossroads in kind of really assessing, especially after this pandemic, you know, where we go from here. And with regard to kind of youth mental health, kind of the resources that we need and are currently expending, the need that seems to exist in the community, that seems like one piece I feel like, you know, I would like to look at, you know, as a whole kind of strategically, are we meeting the needs of the community in terms of that work and kind of even upstream, you know, before it gets to this point where kids are on waiting lists seeking services, what can we as a community do upstream? So that's sort of one place where I thought, you know, I would like to look at strategically what we're doing as a department. And then just health equity as a whole, you know, so I sort of thought, well, you know, that I think for our department has a lot of benefit to think big picture to, you know, so for accreditation, that piece of it, you know, coming up with a strategic plan for this organization seemed like a good investment of time, you know, as we move ahead post, you know, in this phase of the pandemic. And I think that's a pretty solid argument that could be made, you know, if we need to do that.
Yeah, I agree. I like the strategic plan part that right now it sounds like would help us outline a path.
Mm-hmm.
Is this
The other thing
we
is
put on
that-
our agenda, like every other month or every third month or something like that?
Sorry, you want it as a recurring agenda item? Is that what you're saying, Rob?
Well, just to move the discussion forward and you know, see how we're progressing.
Yep.
With accreditation.
Yep. Okay.
I mean, the other thing is too, I think that the public in general has a much greater appreciation for what public health does now than they did 2 years ago. I can remember people saying, yeah, well, what's public health all about anyway? What do you do? I think they know.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. I actually think we have some good momentum that we could build on. In fact, I don't think this group kind of toots their horn enough, you know, because I think when things are going smoothly, people don't realize what this group does. But I would like to see, it's why I'm always championing more communications, because I feel like we need to put ourselves out there more, you know, and just share with the community what all we do.
I totally agree with you, Christina.
The next item, I don't know, Lynn, if you're taking the lead, or is Tara, are you taking the lead on the next agenda item? Okay.
Yeah.
Tara should, yeah.
So the wells, yeah. So as you can see, we did pretty much a complete overhaul of our well regulations. We worked very closely, Diane and I, with Sean from Division to get his feedback, since he does our pre-operation inspections of these wells. So we had a lot of things we had to add, such as the geothermal wells, which weren't initially in there. We also added well abandonment section to the well reg. So we did update it quite a bit. So that's why I didn't know if we could just have a quick discussion on the updates to see if everyone agrees with these edits, and then we could add any other tweaks you think that you see fit. As you see on here, there's a couple notes that Sean's looking to hear back from some of his contacts on the closed loop geothermal wells, and we're finishing up and getting those edits done. But other than that, we've pretty much agreed on the remaining of the sections that we added.
I mean, I assume whatever he reviews, you know, he knows more than we do. I just had a question under geothermal. We have, like there's certain setbacks and do we know what those 50 feet from a private potable water supply, 25 feet from contamination? Like, we know what those are? Is that standard? Is it similar to other things?
So yes, we basically went back to the DEP requirements and the heat source pump well setback requirements. So we added those into these. So these are all taken from regulations, state regulations. So we basically amended our regs to include those setbacks. That was one of the things that we always got feedback on from well drillers, like, okay, well, why do I have to meet the setback for a potable water well when I'm putting in a geothermal well? And I said, well, that's because we haven't updated them. So now we're up to par with what the state regulations are for these geothermal wells, which is great. So.
Okay, great. And then just under H there, we have discharge water from the heat per DEP guidelines. I would just have a link there, a direct reference. I assume it's the thing above the guidelines for ground source, but it just looks generic.
Oh, sure. Section H.
Then all 7 of those review this installation, like that's.
Yeah, so our well application is pretty extensive.
Yeah.
Now that it's going to be put online, this is going to be 100% easier because everyone will get triggered as the application moves down the line to each department, similar to like a building department permit. We get triggered on the health side. So yes, we have all these departments review just to see if they have any red flags like fire, if there's any underground storage tanks that they have permits for that we need to know about. You know, this has all been incorporated, so.
And then just under testing, there's a typo, just says there's a random 9 next to the word safety under 12.18.2. That's all.
Okay, no, thank you for that. Okay.
I had a question as well.
We're all in agreement with these updates. I mean, we can take another month to review, and then by that time I'll have the extra items from Sean, hopefully, and I can add those to these. And then we can give you like the more finalized, revised version for next month.
Steve, you said you had a question, I think. Right?
I do, on the geothermal. So, and maybe this is this, you know, this whole thing about a cross connection between the municipal water supply and the geothermal well.
Yes.
All right. So in 12.12.1, it says there shall be no cross connection between the geothermal well and domestic supply.
Right.
And then when you get to 12.12.2, it says there shall be no unprotected cross connection between the geothermal well and the municipal water supply. Now, municipal water supply is different than domestic supply, I expect.
Yep.
All right. Because this backflow prevention device kind of implies that there is a connection, right? Because
I hear you.
you're going to get cold water in from the municipal supply.
Yeah, and that is one of the points that Sean's getting clarification on. I know he's been finding some wells. I think there was one instance that we had a geothermal that might have been hooked up as an irrigation, and there might have been a risk there to be connected to the municipal. So there was that question, and that's what this is part of the clarification he's gaining from his contact with the state. So we're going to be hopefully clarifying that
Okay.
prior to
We'll
the
wait
next.
until we see the clarifications on it.
Yep. So.
Right.
All right. Other questions about Article 12? Or comments? Okay, so you'll bring that back after we get those additions?
Yes.
Great, thank you. Okay, that brings us to the draft policy on racial and health equity.
I think Lynn was going to take the lead, but this does fall, I think, into the category I was referencing of a policy that is not just internal focused, and it's something that applies not just to public health, but to all of health and human services. But it's something that we want and need the board to give us their feedback on and their input.
So I went through the policy. I think it's changed a little bit since you last saw it. And I particularly wanted to address the concerns that Steve had raised at a couple of meetings. The one concern about the different descriptions of the factors. The first reference is to factors that contribute to health disparities, while the second one is about wait, hold on a second. Are the I'm looking at what's on the screen here. Right. So one of them is the contributing the factors that contribute to inequity, and the other is about bias. And while they're very similar issues, they are slightly different, at least as I conceived of it. If we want to change that, I'm fine with that. Just need some direction on that. And the other concern that I remember you raising, Steve, was about the languages, the translated languages, and that it would be extremely expensive. And actually, we have been doing this for a while now. At presentations at the Needham Housing Authority, the languages that we had to have interpreters for were Russian and Chinese. We did not need this Spanish or Portuguese, which are languages that are needed more in the schools than in the housing. So we take a look at the specific population that we are addressing and determine which languages are appropriate for translation and interpreting.
Thanks, Lynn.
Yeah.
I just make one small editorial suggestion, which is where we have under procedure, number 1, staff members will be intentional in addressing. I would just leave it at addressing health inequities with special needs rather than all forms and causes of. That sounds like impossible to do. Just to, you're focusing on it with, racial inequities being a particular focus, it sounds like. Is that too watered down?
So the reason why I included all of those other pieces is when we look at health inequity, it's important to look at all those other factors. I'm fine to leave that out if that's what the board prefers, but that was just the thinking behind it.
All forms and causes, you mean?
Of health inequities, yes, because that includes poverty and gender and language and those kinds of things that we know contribute to health inequity. The struggle here was in writing a policy that addresses both health inequity and racial health and racial disparities.
Perhaps those two should be separate policies then.
I guess I would just, the all is a hard, and I do a lot of legal work and
okay,
get yourself into a corner, but it's fine, just, you're.
No, we can take that out.
That's fine.
Mm-hmm.
To me.
Were there any other edits or comments or suggestions from the board? Obviously, this is not directly related to, but does tie into the Needham Unites Against Racism and sort of the intentional work that we want to do about health inequality and health inequity.
So yes, I mean, I'd have to do a walkthrough, but I submitted at the end of our last meeting something for review that was not distributed to the board members. And I would like to see that distributed so that we can take a look at it.
Okay.
A couple of specific comments for what we have right here in front of us. As far as the languages, I think it's the, after the semicolon that matters. And I think we can remove the others because things change. Right now, you're indicating whether the common language is in Needham homes and in Needham schools. That may change. Rather than updating the policy all the time, we should just say that all educational materials will be translated into the language of the community, etc. That will be a little bit more enduring.
That's great. Thank you.
Okay. We still don't have it right when we're, doing the laundry list of, gender and sexual orientation. It's gender identity and sex, which are separate. And I think I had, in the draft I submitted, put sort of a laundry list that had been adopted by the American Medical Association, which went through about 3 years of development. So it might be worth reviewing that so that we get all of the other various biases that may be there into that. And I have to say, I still have problems with that first paragraph, which I think is superfluous to the policy. I've been in a lot of deliberative bodies. There are a lot of whereases that go before resolutions, and then there's policy. And the whereases get dropped when you get to go into policy, because the policy is what you're going to do. And you don't want that to be judgmental in any way. And I still think that first paragraph is problematic.
So it did get sent to all the board members on May 14th, but it did not get sent to Lynn. So I'll forward that to you, Lynn, so you can see that as well.
Did it not get cut? Maybe it just didn't go to me because I submitted it directly to you.
No, you're on the chain
Am I on
list
the
that I
list?
sent. Yeah. So unless it didn't send to anybody, but it shows in my
No,
sent box.
yeah, we got it. We got it. And I did agree to those changes. So I was surprised to see that that it was back to where we were last month. But yeah, I think it is good when we're writing policy to kind of keep it a bit more general. And yeah, maybe we can review this again. And I know Rob had shared it via Google Docs. Can we continue editing it that way?
It's hard, I think. So anything that multiple board members are corresponding on is a public record. So I don't know that having a live document is the way the board wants to go, but if you think that's more effective, we're talking about it publicly, so it's not like you're trying to hide anything.
Mm-hmm.
So if you want to do that, I'll figure out how we officially post it. I just have to figure out how we can have it so it's active for you to edit, but it's restricted for other folks to just see. So I'll have to figure that out in Google. I know it's possible. I just don't know how to do it off the top of my head.
Okay. The other piece I wondered let's see. Yeah, with the policy, I wondered is if we wanted to include something about, so all Needham Health and Human Services divisions will design and provide outreach and programs to benefit, these groups. Do we want to talk about the way we measure some of these things? Because I think that's part of what we're lacking right now. Even that question, asking Sarah, do you have kind of data on when you look at the bullying data on the schools, you see that, Black, Hispanic, and Asian kids are experiencing this at higher rates, but then, who's accessing, some of the services provided by the town with social workers and therapists and such. We don't have that information. So I wonder if we want to include the measurement of some of these pieces in there too.
Can we, I would like to talk a little bit more about the opening paragraph that Steve and Christina think we should remove. This is something that we ran by the racial equity group, staff group, and they all felt very strongly that we needed a strong statement in the beginning, essentially making the case for why we need this policy. The many policies that I have written or seen in the past have in the beginning a statement about why the policy is necessary, thus the purpose section. So I just wanted to make it clear that the staff felt very strongly that we needed this first paragraph.
Yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to say that I think we should completely remove it. I actually think it's important to put some of these pieces in, but with some data too, which we have good data. And I wondered if you wanted to include that. I think I said this at the last meeting too, because they're big statements to make it. But and I think if we're making them, let's back it up a bit. And it would provide some learning for the community members as well. But yeah, I don't think it has to be completely removed. I think the language can be tweaked a bit, and I'd love to help with that. But yeah, I think it's fine to have some of that in the purpose.
See, I think the second paragraph gets exactly at what we need. I mean, that is the purpose for this. It gets directly to the public health implications of institutional racism without getting into a lot of stuff that is, about police violence, that is inflammatory, that has a lot of people upset on a lot of different levels, that has maybe not as much to do directly with public health. I mean, there's all sorts of stuff about defunding police. I don't know that that's directly where we want to be going, as opposed to paragraph 2, which says, look, this is what we're talking about. It removes all of the emotional part of it, but it keeps all of the substance.
So maybe we need to probably think about it a little bit more. For any board member who hasn't weighed in, it would be helpful if you could give us your thoughts either now or offline. I had generally been in alignment with Lynn of the staff believe, and I believe it's important to really clearly lay out why this is an issue currently. I do understand your point, Steve, that maybe the more lasting statement is in the second paragraph, that is maybe less subject to the concerns of the moment. I still think that I like the idea of having the two of them together, but I do understand your point about that second paragraph.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
So I was one of the people who encouraged the formation of the Racial Equity Committee last July for the HHS division. And I know from many of the meetings we had with up to 14 of us at a time we met every other week for about 9-10 months. I know that much of the discussion centered around the root causes for the racism in our nation and the resulting health disparities and inequities. So I feel as though, even though it can be inflammatory, I think inflammatory is part of the problem. And if we don't talk about those and we don't confront them in the language we use, then we're just ultimately still skirting what the root issues are. And I agree that inflammatory statements can be problematic for people, but I also feel like we need to take a strong position about where we stand about that as a HHS division. So I respect everybody's different opinions, because that's what the nature of this discourse is about. But I did just want to support the fact that I think that those statements, while inflammatory, are really directed towards much of the root of why we have so much hatred and racism in our country.
Can you just make an introduction and then purpose is where the institutional racism part starts? Or I guess it's where purpose starts. So it's, I actually like, I do have to say, I like the context with the first paragraph because it does really set the stage. You know, we understand it's there, the racism stuff and the social conditions and health endpoints have been there for years and years. I think this is framing what's shifting perhaps and shining a light on it. Just my thought.
Yeah, I think it's largely about the context in which this is being written. Why are we writing this now? This is why we're writing it now. And I think inflammatory is not really the right word here. I actually changed the language several times to make it less charged. Just vaguely saying police violence that led to the deaths of Black people. Because I'm aware of the fact that all of this is charged. All issues related to racism are charged for all of us. And we can't skirt that.
I like Kathleen's idea about maybe having the first paragraph under introduction, because our purpose is really the second paragraph and beyond.
Also, in some policies, I've used background for that section. So we'll take a look at that.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. I think too, some of it sounded like something, yeah, kind of editorial that I sort of felt like, yeah, I think we can tweak that writing a little bit too.
I think it's the word violence that's going to be the big thing to tweak.
And what word should we use instead of violence?
I'm not sure. I think that requires some thought.
Violence is what has been going on. Actually, I'll pull back.
So I do think, and I'm sorry about the confusion, Lynn, and Lynn not getting Steve's comments because Steve and Christine, I think, had both made comments. So we'll look at those. I think we'll try to incorporate some of these, and we'll come back maybe for more discussion next month. Or actually, maybe if it's okay, we might do it later this month at the June 23rd meeting, if we can get our ducks in a row in time.
You know what? I'm not going to be at that meeting.
Okay.
Nor will I. I won't be at that meeting either.
Okay.
Can we do it in July?
Sure, of course.
So Tim will do that through Google Docs?
Yes, I will figure out how we do that through Google Docs, but yes.
I'll apologize. I actually have a hard stop today at 10:30, so I'm going to need to leave the meeting at this point.
Okay.
Can I ask you a question before you log off, Steve?
Sure.
Are your comments in Google Docs? If not, I can add those in.
I don't
No?
think I've seen the Google Doc. If you want to just send the link. I mean, I understand it's kind of the group editing thing we got to be careful of from a public record standpoint.
Okay, we'll do.
So Tiffany, Steve's comments are in the document that I shared with you, and I edited some of his comments, and those should be in there too.
Okay, perfect. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you all.
Thanks, Steve.
So the next topic on the agenda is the Needham Unites Against Racism initiative. I unfortunately was not at the board meeting. I was moving the day that the board talked about this. I did talk to the staff and I did read the board minutes and I also did watch the YouTube video. And I tried to encapsulate on page 90 of the packet the board's intent to agree with many of the concepts, but not officially agree with the Nuwari position, and not officially adopt the documents that Nuwari had promulgated. And I put that into a statement, which obviously is very draft and could certainly be edited. I would like to sort of venture an opinion that, and I don't know all of the boards that have adopted it, but I don't know any board in the town that has not adopted the Nuwari vision and principles. And to me, I worry that the board is making a very nuanced political statement when that nuance will not carry to the public. I think the question is, are you against racism? And the board's answer has to be yes. And it can add on and also some additional information. But I really think it has to be a yes or no. Do you adopt this or do you not? And I worry that not adopting it is very politically challenging. I have advocated repeatedly behind the scenes for a public health division staff member and a board of health member to be included in Nuwari initiatives going forward. And I don't know if it's guaranteed, but I hope and I expect that will be honored, that request. I wish it had been honored before because I would have liked for the board to have been more involved in it, given what I think is the very central role that health plays in sort of inequitable treatment in the community. But that's sort of my own thoughts. This is obviously a letter from the board, so it has to reflect what the board wants to do and the message the board wants to put forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So I think, I would edit the language quite a bit to kind of more state what we are for, rather than what we, didn't agree with. And, when you look at some of the intentional practices, my thinking in kind of commending the work and, not fully adopting it is, can we really do all of this? And if we are, because I almost wonder if folks, if you look at the list of people who've adopted it, I think other than the school committee, I don't see any other town body listed there yet. And maybe they will at some point, but I could imagine that, all these other groups, the finance committee, the planning committee is all wondering, how are we going to actually do? And if you read the intentional practices, some of these things I can imagine how we can incorporate into the work, but I just don't want to sign on to something and then be held accountable for things that honestly we can't do. So of course we are, for, advancing health equity and against, racism. And, we want to build on the work of Nuwari, but it's also a work in progress that they're currently in the middle of it, where they're not at the end of, what they're doing. And I do hope that there will be some representation from public health in that group, and we'll continue to advocate for that. But it didn't feel like something at this point that was adoptable. It felt like something that, was adaptable, and needs to be adapted to our work.
So I think that's true. I do want to reiterate, I think you might be projecting a level of nuance that the public won't understand or might not immediately be clear. But it's possible other committees or boards will decide not to adopt it. I anticipate that all the other HHS boards will, but that's not a guarantee. I also, Christine, you and I have talked about this. I view this as sort of goals to constantly work on rather than something that is specifically achievable in the short term. To me, it's a sort of continuous improvement cycle, and you work on all these things and you try to get better a little bit each year and you get better and better, but you never fully achieve any of them. To me, at least, that was how I approached it, that it was a continuous process improvement. Mm-hmm.
The first intentional practice says we will try to increase interactions and cultivate friendships, among the various groups. Now, what are we as a Board of Health really supposed to do with that? I think there are ways that can be done, but the way that statement is set, I sort of feel like, yeah, I don't know. It just didn't quite make sense for this, the piece like, commit to self-education to have a better understanding and be more informed. I think there's that, that we can do that work. But I just went through each and every piece of this and just wondered, how is this going to play out, and how are HHS bodies going to carry this work out? But I don't know, perhaps we can, Rob and I are speaking to select board members at some point. And so perhaps this is something, a discussion we can have with them and, continue this amongst the board too later. Because I don't want to give the impression that we are not for the work that Nuari is doing, that the community is doing. I don't want to give that impression at all. I think very.
Right. I sort of think I think we all agree with the vision and principles. We do, but yeah, we don't want the public to think we're not. But at the same time, we don't want to hold ourselves responsible and accountable for doing things that we may not be able to achieve.
Yeah.
I guess. One thing is there's no timeline on adopting the vision and principles. I don't think.
That's correct.
The way that it's written now, I thought that the second sentence was a little strong. Although the Board of Health has voted not to formally adopt the Nuari vision and principles, that's a little negative, and I at least my recollection, I don't think that's the way the discussion really went. I think we acknowledge and support the Nuari vision and principles, and agree or recognize that these documents represent an important starting point. That way we're in agreement, and we're considering.
So Rob, is it as simple as the not needs to be in front of voted, or it needs to be sort of a completely revamped that sentence? Instead of has not voted to formally adopt.
So we didn't vote.
We say not voted.
Yeah, I don't even think we need to include anything about.
Yeah, I don't either.
Vote. Yeah.
So
can I add, are we able to adopt the racial equity statement? And maybe even the guiding principles, and say we voted and we adopt these two. It's this intentional practice stuff that we can't. Can we take section? We can do what we want, I guess, without drawing attention to it.
So we can do what the board has complete discretion. The memo from the select board says the select board asks that your board, committee, or commission consider adopting the vision and principles and integrating these concepts into your work plans, programs, and goals. We are interested in your perspectives, input going forward, and would appreciate you letting us know what approaches and actions you plan to take. So I think, one important part of that, regardless of what other steps the board take, is that the board feels it needs to be included, and I would say the same for the public health division, feels like it needs to be included in future efforts. And that commitment from Nuari to include other people has to exist separate and apart from whether the Board of Health formally adopts or informally adopts or supports, however we want to phrase that. I looked at it though as the select board and Nuari are asking other boards to adopt this. And so the board doesn't have to answer the question, but the question is, will you adopt this? So the board either has to say yes, no, or ignore the question.
We say we'll adopt it, but we have some refinements to the language that we'd like to make
Of
before we
course.
finally vote, something like that.
Absolutely. I guess what I was saying with the nuance is I think that they're, again, I oversimplified it, of course, but to me, it seems like in the community, it's going to be a question of, are you against racism? And the Board of Health's answer is, well, something, something, something. And I think.
Oh, it's absolutely, we're against racism.
Absolutely. And I think that the point is to try to state that as clearly as possible and then add the nuance maybe after. So I worry that the message might get the message might not be heard, that if the first answer isn't an affirmative and a strong, yes, we're against racism, then all of the nuance gets lost, is my concern.
Yeah, I understand that.
Might be good to put that up front and then do the nuances. Yeah, I agree with.
So I think, the other piece is they are putting on that Nuari page, the groups who have adopted
Yep.
this, they have a running list.
Yep.
Yeah, so currently it's the Select Board, the Human Rights Committee, the Council for the Arts, and the School Committee.
It's pretty, we have to adopt these, don't we?
Yeah, I mean, I almost feel like, yeah.
You can't wordsmith it. You can't, there's a whole committee developed this language. And if we don't, it's not perfect, and we probably can't do all the things they're asking us to do. But it sounds like
Well, one thing,
you're not less racist if you're not.
Equity statement, so much of it sounds like, it would be easy for an individual to sign on to this. It's a little bit trickier when it's a whole group. And even the equity statement says we will commit as individuals to be intentional in our efforts to learn and practice anti-bias. And
Christine, I think to your point, maybe what the Public Health Division needs to do is bring to the board how we think we can initially begin to address some of these.
Yeah.
And we can assess, okay, that looks very feasible, and we think we can do that easily. This is going to require more resources, but we've decided this is a priority, and that's where we're going to commit our resources, and figure out, are there ways to realistically say that we're making a good faith effort to address these, or whether we're going to be making half a commitment. And to your point, if we can't fully commit to trying to advance this work, then that's a problem. So maybe we need to present the board with a very simple plan of like, okay, for these intentional practices, here's how we think we could either get that done or start getting that done. And maybe that would help guide the Public Health Division's work generally, because we're going to have to try to do that. But it would also hopefully give the board some assurance that this won't just be a commitment on paper that we all forget about, or we go back and like, oh man, we didn't even get any of that done. Maybe we will be able to figure out we can get most or all of it done.
Yeah, because I think the Nuari's next step at some point will be, they asked for community feedback at one point, and that was one of the things that I shared was, I didn't see any way to measure any of this work. And so I think, they said, well, this is a work in progress. And so we're moving towards that, Yeah. So, and that was my concern too, is that we will say we're going to do all these wonderful things and we don't do it. So that would be great to know how you are able to accomplish these goals.
And maybe our acceptance statement says something like, while some of the intentional practices may be difficult to achieve, and that they're goals or something like that we're taking what you're saying and telling you what we can do and what we can't, maybe. Right? Like we'll use those as goal, incorporate those into our goals or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
I guess the other thing is we certainly don't want to be in the position of being like the last board to adopt these principles.
Right. And now it's going to be July because that's the next meeting we're all together. So.
Well, could we release some kind of interim statement that, we bet we're basically in agreement with the spirit of the document, but that we are in the process of modifying some of the language, something like that.
Sure. So let me sort of take a stab, I guess. The Board of Health, agrees racism is a problem. The Board of Health thinks Nuari has done great work and has put an important sort of set of documents forward. The board is working to come up with an actionable plan to advance these issues, and is going to, discuss and vote on that at its monthly meeting in July. Does that sound good? Okay.
Yeah, I think that sounds good.
Okay.
And I include in that like the specific verbiage, like we support the Nuari vision and principles, like we are for it.
Yes. Okay.
So that's
Um,
it's very clear.
So what?
I feel
what
like even you could say a statement like the Board of Health is committed to the work of racial and health equity for, all of Needham. That should be like front and center. We are of course committed to this work. And if anything, I feel like, we're being really intentional with these intentional practices and thinking about how we can do this work. And I think this process is important, rather than just checking it off.
I think it's very simple to say you'll do something. It's much more complicated to actually assess whether you have the capability to do it and how you will do it and how you'll, lock yourself into that commitment and make sure it happens. And that is important. So what I will do, and this will be, I'll work with the team to try to get by the end of this week or the beginning of next week, a draft statement to the board, very clearly outlining the board's focus on, against racism and for diversity and equity and inclusion, and tying that into health equity in the community, and saying we support Nuwari and we're working on a plan to make sure that we can make it happen, and that it's going to be discussed in July.
Yes.
That sounds good.
Yes.
Is anyone awaiting this response?
The town manager and the assistant town manager, sent an email to follow up, like,
Oh, okay.
just are people considering this? Have boards talked about it? They're not going to, the board's determination is absolutely the board's. The board, no one is above the board in this area. No one has decision-making authority over the Board of Health. So it's entirely up to the board if it wants to agree or not. I think what we just talked about is the board absolutely agrees with this. The board is just being very deliberate about how it commits to getting this work done and the resources it already has to get this work done, and maybe the resources it needs to get this work done.
Mm-hmm.
So like you said, Christina, it would be very easy to simply agree. And we're not taking the easy way out. We're trying to really look at how we will make it happen.
Yeah, that sounds good.
All right. I think that sounds good, Tim.
Okay.
I agree.
All right. So we'll get that out to you later this week. Well, Friday or early next week, I guess is probably the best way to do it. I know we're running behind, Mr. Chair. The next item, which the board could discuss and vote on, or could choose not to vote on till later this month or early next month, is the fee schedule. Normally, we set the fee schedule in March for the fiscal year that will begin July 1. Because of COVID and some lack of keeping track of things on my part, it didn't come up in March. It wasn't part of our discussion. My suggestion to the board, in part to make it simpler for Public Health Division, because we've already gotten a number of renewals for permits that begin July 1, is to maintain for the upcoming fiscal year the lower priced fees that it had in place during fiscal year 21, which is the year that's ending. So for fiscal year 22, to maintain those lower fees, and then just for the Public Health Division to be very clear with all vendors, they're getting an extra year of reduced prices, but the expectation is it will be subject to a board vote, but the expectation is that prices will go back to their normal level, the pre-pandemic level, in the year that will begin July 1, 22. So it'd be fiscal year 23.
I think that's a good idea, because the restaurants and a lot of these other things that we're charging fees to have suffered a good deal as a result of this, and it's going to take them a while to come back.
Yep, agreed. They're still recovering and will be.
Yeah, home construction and septic, I'm not so much, I don't think, but you're not going to pick and choose, so.
Yeah, okay.
We need a vote on that.
So the board could either choose to vote now, or could wait till either its next meeting or its July meeting. But it's up to the board's discretion. The fees are not subject to, so historically what we do when we have board votes is we usually advertise them, especially when they're on a regulation. State law only requires that advertising and public notice for septic Title V votes, but the board historically has done that for any regulation it's considered. We don't do the public notice for fees. We just put it on the agenda and the board chooses to vote. So it could vote now, or it could wait till all 5 members are present in July.
Real fast before I decide to take a vote, can I add that we put, because we have summer camps that go all summer long, so if we're gonna cut the fees from June to July, that we extend that for summer camps through the whole summer of 22. Add a little caveat in there, so they all do have fees if they apply in August.
Oh, of 20 next year.
Yeah, next summer. And then the following summer camp in 23 would be back to regular schedule.
Because technically the fiscal year 23 summer season actually starts in June before the fiscal year begins.
Yeah.
Okay.
So it's at your discretion.
My feeling is that if we have a motion, we can vote on it.
Then I'll make the motion that we continue the current reduced fee schedule through 2020 through the 2021-22 fiscal year.
Yep, 22 fiscal year. Okay.
I want to make sure I get the fiscal year right. That we'll vote on increasing the fees back to the pre-pandemic levels effective in July of 22.
And with, are you also proposing to increase the caveat that Tiffany raised about the summer camps?
Yes.
Okay.
A second.
Okay. We'll have a vote. Christina?
Yes.
Kathleen?
Yes.
Ed? Ed?
Sorry, yes.
And Rob is yes. Okay. Next item up is the warming and cooling center emergency plans.
So Kathleen, I believe you had asked for this item to be on the agenda. This is a plan that Needham worked with some of its colleagues in NC 7, now 8, to develop. So it's a plan that was done in 2016 originally. It was tweaked just a little bit in 2018, but that still is quite a while ago. And we want to discuss it, so I think the floor is yours.
Oh, well, I knew this had come up last summer. We talked about there being a particular heat wave, but it didn't quite meet the requirements of setting up cooling centers and things. So not having seen this plan before, I didn't know the level of, involvement. As long as we have a place for people to go when it is way too hot during the day, which apparently we have the library and soon we'll have the senior center. I guess that's, if we feel like this is sufficient. I know last summer we were worried about that, and that had to do with it being above 90 for 2 days or something.
Sure. So I think it's actually, it is worth discussing because we set it at a level that maybe is too high. When we're talking about heat, for example, and I'm going to forget exactly off the top of my head, but it's on page 4. We'd open warming and cooling centers in the event that temperatures are forecasted to drop below 0 or to rise above 100 for a period of 3 days, and or as determined by Needham Emergency Management. So we said temperature as opposed to heat index, which maybe is our first area for improvement. And then does that make sense? 100 degrees Fahrenheit, what do we want to make that in terms of heat index? And does 3 days in a row, or should we make it if it's 2 days in a row? I think those are definitely points to discuss.
Yeah, I think the 100 degrees for 3 days is a high bar. I think the heat index is perhaps a better one. I just don't know what, I didn't understand that like nuance. I looked at the heat index, at least what our tape, I don't understand the levels of what, I don't want to get too far into this, but 100 degrees for 3 days, that was my recollection from last summer. And it just, I just worry that if people have air conditioning, that's kind of dangerous. That's all.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we also need to do a policy on this as well as have this. That way we know what the triggers are to make this happen. So yeah, thinking about that as well. So we can do a draft one of those as well.
I just don't know the level of effort. Like, I mean, if it is that people can go, sit at the library or something, but I don't, that's okay, I guess. But it is, you have people that have difficulty getting around, and those, and are we checking on, are there people we check on, that kind of stuff?
Yeah, there's a whole process. When we opened it up in 2019, we opened up our RC over the weekend to the library and coordinated with the YMCA. And then the senior center, so the senior center has their side of taking care of, they'll call and check on those who they know need help. But one of my goals also for this next year or two is to try to find grant funding that we could supply air conditioners or something like that to families, especially in housing, because there's not a large space over there that we could potentially utilize. So working through that process, but we can get this updated and send it again for thoughts.
Yeah, okay, thank you.
Just a quick question. So, I mean, certainly 100 degrees Fahrenheit or, heat index even of 100, I mean, that's for three days of that for older people is really, really tough.
Yes.
They would definitely have a lot of problems before that's up. But if we made it 2 days, like how many times in the last year would it have been triggered? Because that's, it's a lot of effort if you drop it from 3 to 2, I would assume.
Yes.
Yeah, and I would hope the goal would be to know that before the 3 days happen. So not wait for the 2 days and then open it. The goal would be to look at the forecast and say, this is going to happen for the next 3 days. So we're going to anticipate opening it for those specific days. So that process we'll need to work on.
But we could also do a little research on, if 2019 and 2020 happened and we had this new standard, we would have opened it twice, or we would have opened it 2 times for 2 days each, or something like that.
Right. And how many people come too? Like,
I was here during the 2019, and again, the library was also open in the Y. I was here at RRC, and both Saturday and Sunday was very hot, because I think it was actually over 100. It was 98 or 99 actual temperature, not real field temperature. And a father and his daughter came, who were going to the pool, but they decided to eat lunch in the cool multi-purpose room at RRC. And then one other person came the next day to look around and see what we had, and then they didn't like our board games that we had available, so they left. So it was actually a very small group, but I think it speaks to, who are we trying to serve? Do those people have access to us? We don't have any weekend van drivers. There wasn't anyone available to pick anyone up. So we were open for anyone who could come in, but does that really mean we're available to the people who might need it most? And I think that speaks to Tiffany's point about, unfortunately, the housing authority itself doesn't have many physical spaces on its campuses that are ideal for opening a cooling center. So what options do we have to bring people who need it to the locations that can be open?
Okay. So we'll look forward to an update on that. Great. Last item is freon removal from building demolitions, and it looks like that's Tara and Diana.
I can start. So we got a complaint from a resident who lived on a street that they had a demolition going on. And she reported that there were evidence of them demolishing the house with the AC units still in the windows and also a refrigerator. So this kind of triggered us to kind of investigate more. And Diana and I reached out to the fire chief and the fire inspectors and also building commissioner, because they issued the demo permit, about that piece and who actually looks for these freon device, items that contain freon. So again, that we went back and forth, and the building commissioner reached out to fire inspectors again about if they could just add that onto their pre-demo checklist, that they could see if there's any air conditioners or refrigerators that may still be present that the owner didn't take out prior to demolition. And that's where we left it. So it's not really anything we need. I just wanted to review that with you, that was what was discussed and added. So
I think if the demolition process, allows, if you can just jiggle it, the permit process, that should do it.
Right.
Diana, did you have something also to add?
We spoke with other towns nearby. Oh, I don't know if you can hear me. That we spoke with other towns, and it was kind of a mixed bag of whether or not the health department went into the demo. So some towns are like us that we just do paperwork, and other towns actually have the health department going in. But just adding that it was a mixed bag, that it's not, there's no standard, it seems like, even around here, of what's being done to check for that.
Yeah, and the building commissioner really was adamant about the safety concern, because a lot of these houses are stripped down prior to demolition. It's a safety issue to have more and more, town staff, but why not have the fire inspectors that are there anyway, just add that on to their checklist. So that's what they've done. And so from here on out, that's the process, so.
Okay. Yeah, and the fire chief's statement about not doing it on the last day, on demo day, I thought was a good point.
Yep.
That should avoid that. Okay, so that's all the agenda items for today. Tim, you had put topics for upcoming Board of Health meetings.
Yep, I just wanted to, I know that some board members have sent in requests or have asked about this, and obviously this is a meeting that was originally only scheduled for 90 minutes that now is over 2 hours. So it was certainly a jam-packed agenda today. We couldn't really fit anything more in, but we do have issues upcoming that we're hoping to tackle in July, and then either in August or September when we get that meeting date pinned down. And there are a couple topics of particular interest. So those are a couple of them, but there's more, that we want to get to in the coming months.
Okay. And our next meeting is our COVID focus, June 23rd at 9 a.m.
Yes, sorry about that. I did take that off in the interest of fitting everything on one page. Yes, we do have a COVID focused meeting on the 23rd, which we will cover COVID business and maybe a little bit of other regular stuff. And then the regular board meeting, which will be 2 hours on July 29th. Right now, it looks like August availability is challenging, but we're trying for a board meeting in early September, hopefully. I do realize that one of the dates that I put out in the doodle poll, unfortunately, was the Jewish holiday, Rosh Hashanah. So I'm not sure that will work, unfortunately. That day that I offered at least will work. So.
Okay. All right. So with that, a motion to adjourn.
Sure.
And I'll take Ed's as a second there. So Kathleen,
Yes.
Christina,
Yes.
Ed, and Rob is yes. So we're adjourned. Thank you all for your time and efforts, and we'll see you at the end of the month.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We'll see you.